to tomguitar.co.uk right now to check out the free guide, Boost Your Picking Speed by 50%. It covers the 7 most common mistakes everybody makes when they're learning speed picking. If you're making any of these mistakes, then you can't get progress. So check out that guide and hopefully it can help you massively boost your picking speed. That's at tomguitar.co.uk. Now on with the free lesson. Right then, so when you're learning a new style on guitar, it's very easy to fall into a few traps that will really stop you from learning that style really quickly. So let's say you're a metal or shred guitar player at the moment and you want to learn blues. We'll use that example. Now, obviously you've learned a lot of cool guitar skills while you've been learning metal and while you've been learning shred guitar. You know, you've learned all the techniques that you need to use, you've learned your proper left and right hand position, you've learned some basic theory there, or even quite a lot of theory if you're quite advanced at that style. You will have learned the basics of improvisation and scales and all that kind of thing. So you've already got a really good standpoint and you've got a nice level to build off. But the mistake a lot of people make when they go to learn a new guitar style is they start from scratch again. So they say, okay, well I want to learn blues. So they start listening to some blues guitar players, as you would, you know, that's a good thing to do. And then they start to think, okay, well, how can I learn this? And then all of the blues guitar lessons out there are for beginners that are just starting to learn blues and haven't really learned a lot of guitar before. So it might be, you know, a really simple, like 1-octave pentatonic scale, for instance. Or it might be, I don't know, 5 easy blues licks or something. And they're all really beginner, basic level. And then when you go into like the more advanced blues lessons, if you manage to find some of those, then suddenly you've got stuff that assumes you already know the basics of the blues style, but you don't. You're already good at a different guitar style, but this blues thing is completely new to you, or this jazz thing if that's what you're learning, or this rock or shred thing if that's what you're learning. So it can be difficult to approach it in the right way, and it can be very easy to fall into the trap of approaching this new style like it's something completely new. Okay, but what you need to do to learn a new guitar style really effectively is you need to say, okay, well, what's already very similar in this style compared to the styles that I already know? So you need to look at the things you already know and then use those to learn this new style really quickly. Because when you're learning a new style, there really isn't a whole lot new to learn. Even if you're learning 2 styles that seem like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, let's say you're learning metal and then you want to go and learn, say, some jazz guitar. Well, there are already a lot of skills you already know there. So you're already really solid with your rhythm skills. You already know how to divide up the bar, for instance, if we're talking, you know, 8th notes and 16th notes and everything, and that applies to all genres. And you're still using the same 12 notes from A to G with all the sharps and flats in between. So you're using the same notes, you're using them in the same rhythmic sense, you're still using the same system there. So really, the cake that you're making, if we're going to use that example, that metaphor, is the same. It's just that you're putting different icing on it. So you might think, oh yeah, of course that's obvious, of course I'm using the same 12 notes, but how does that help me? Well, this is more of a mindset thing than anything, because if you approach this new style from the standpoint of, oh, I don't know anything, how am I going to learn this? You know, there's so much to learn, I don't even know how to get started, then you're going to really struggle. But if you think, okay, well, I already know the basics of music, I already know how to, you know, I already know how to play in time, I already know the basics of notes and theory, I've already got my technique down, and now I'm just applying them in a different way. And then it becomes much easier to do. So this is like the equivalent of someone who's a best-selling author then learning to write poetry. Well, I think we both know that if that person was then going to write poetry, if they were a best-selling author of books, then they could probably write pretty good poetry as well, because they've already got all those skills. And that's the same with guitar, it's the same with music. So when you're learning a new style, you need to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of approaching it like a complete beginner. Approach it like somebody who's already got a lot of knowledge, because you have. And then once you can use that, then you'll be in a much better position to then learn that style. So then we come to the question, well, how do you actually go about learning this style? Well, it all comes down to something very simple, and that's just cliches. So if you hear a really cliched blues lick, for instance, you know, like... you know that's blues guitar just because of the cliches that are in there. So that little blues bend, for instance, so instead of just going, you're going, and you're doing a little bend there up by a quarter of a step or whatever, and that's a typical blues cliche. So when you inject your playing with these little cliches of that particular style, then you start to sound like that. Now you might be thinking, oh yeah, but I don't want my playing to sound cliched, I want to sound original. Yeah, that's very true, but when you're getting started, these cliches are a great place to start, because as Guthrie Govan said once, or Guthrie Govan, or however you want to pronounce it, nothing ever becomes a cliche without being good first. So nothing ever becomes one of those overused, typical, expected things if it didn't sound good. Because if it sounded crap, then no one would play it, right? So you need to make sure that you just look at these cliches in this new style. So let's take the example of a shred guitar player learning some blues guitar, and they're not really sure what to do because the lessons are either for complete beginners at blues, or they're for people who are already really good at the blues guitar and just want a few new tips, and there's nothing really there for people who are approaching blues as someone who already plays another genre to a good standard. So you could say, okay, well, can I find the top 3 things that make it sound like blues guitar? So the first thing you should always consider when you're learning a new style is the tone. So what tone do the guitarists normally use? So if you're learning metal, for instance, then obviously you need a lot of gain. You might go for a scooped mid sound, or maybe you'll boost them a little bit if you're playing in a band setting to make your guitar stand out. And you might want to use a lot of delay on the solos and things. So you find out all of the cliches of the guitar tone. So for blues, for instance, you might want like a light overdrive, and then you might want a fairly smooth tone. So that's what I've got set up here. I've got my neck pickup selected, and I'm using just a light overdrive setting to get that typical blues sound. So this doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy new equipment. I'm not suggesting that you have to spend thousands and thousands of pounds to start a new style, unless you want to, in which case it's fine. But just use the equipment you've already got. So you definitely do have an amp that's got some kind of variety in the settings. Now, it might not be able to do everything, but every amp can do at least a few different genres, right? So you don't have to spend a lot of money to do this. Just experiment with the equipment you've already got and see if you can get it to sound in the ballpark of the tone that people normally use for the genre that you're learning. And then once you've done that, then that's step 1. And then the next step is, okay, find all the different cliches and things. Can you find some like typical licks, for instance, that people use in that style, and then learn those and say, okay, well, why do they sound like they do? So you could learn some blues licks, and one might be, for instance, and then you could ask yourself, okay, well, why does that sound like a blues lick? Well, okay, we've got this bend, and then I'm using like a pentatonic Dorian kind of thing there. So, or, you know, just the Dorian scale, minor scale, whatever you want to call it. So you can say, okay, well, now I've taken that cliched lick and I've broken it down a bit and say, okay, why does it sound like that? Well, it's got that little bend in there. Okay, well, when I'm playing blues then I'll use a few bends. And then, oh, well, it uses this scale. Oh, well, that means when I'm playing this new style, well, I'll use those scales. So let's say you're learning metal, for instance, and you're a jazz player, you come into metal, you've got nowhere to start. Well, first off, you know, there's 3 steps. So the first step we talked about is finding the right tone. So, okay, whack on the gain, you know, bridge pickup for the rhythm, and find out how you can make your current equipment sound closer to the tones that people use for that style. And then the next step is finding out a few different licks and learn some like metal solos, for instance, just by a couple of your favourite metal bands, and say, okay, well, why do they sound like that? So you might say, oh, well, they're using, you know, the minor scale here. Oh, okay, well, I'll use the minor scale. And then why does it sound like this? Oh, well, because they're playing a load of really fast picking runs. Ah, okay, so I'll learn some fast picking runs and then it'll start to sound more like metal. So you break down these cliches, you learn a couple of typical licks or solos or songs in that style, and then you break them down and you ask yourself why they sound like they do and why they sound like blues or like jazz or like metal. And then you'll get to the core of why it sounds like that style, okay? So first, get the right guitar tone, and then learn some licks, solos, songs, and whatever, and then break down why they sound like they do, and then apply those elements to your own playing. And then the third step is really simple and it's really fun, because now you're going to improvise while using these. Now, the purpose of this is to learn to think like a blues player or learn to think like a metal player. Because it's great learning all the cliches and getting the right guitar tone and everything, and then you'll be in the right ballpark and you'll be able to make your guitar tone sound like blues or like metal or like jazz or like whatever you want it to sound like. But then the next step is really ingraining that into your playing, so you don't really have to think about it. And when somebody puts on a blues track, you just automatically play great blues sounding guitar, right? Or somebody puts on, say you're playing with a metal band, and then you just naturally know how to play metal without having to think about it. So the way to start thinking like somebody who plays in that genre is to start improvising using these cliches. So you could whack on a backing track and then practice your lead work and consciously focus on using these cliches over and over again. It might sound a bit repetitive, it might sound like, oh, I'm just doing the same things over and over again, but that's the idea here, because you get used to using those elements within your ordinary playing style. So if you're, say, a jazz player and you want to learn blues, let's keep with the blues example, then you put on a blues backing track, you know, whatever it does, and then you improvise over it, but you stay as close as you can just to these cliches. So let's say one of the cliched blues licks you learnt was... So it doesn't really matter which lick this is, you don't have to learn this note for note, I'm just showing you so you get an idea of the concept. And then let's say another one was... So then, you know, you will have learnt a few others as well, and you will have got an idea of why these sound like blues licks, so because of the bends and because of the guitar tone that's used and so on. And then now it's improvising with it, so you whack on the backing track, you know, whatever it's doing, and then you use these cliches, so... And you just use them, and even if it just sounds repetitive, and you just stick to those cliches that you've discovered and that you've learned. And this is a really quick way to learn the style, and it's a really quick way to start thinking like a player who plays that, okay? Because in order to actually learn to think like somebody who plays in that style, you have to first play in that style, and then you'll start to absorb that, okay? So let's go over the three-step process again. So get the right guitar tone, learn the cliches, break them down and find out why they sound like they do, and then improvise using those cliches and using that guitar tone, and keep doing it until you start to learn to think like somebody who plays in that style. And you'll know when you get there, just because it'll sound like the proper genre, but more than that, it will feel easy to do. So you won't have to think, okay, what do blues players do? Oh yeah, I'm going to use this cliched lick now, I'm going to use this lick, I'm going to use this lick. It will just be natural, you won't have to think about it, you'll just say, okay, play blues, and then you'll just be able to play blues. And that's the style, that's the stage you want to get to when you're learning guitar styles. So in summary then, the reason that most people struggle when they're learning a new guitar style, and why it can seem so overwhelming when you try and do it, is because they approach it like it's something completely new to them, and they forget that they've actually learned a lot of the skills they'll need for that new style already. So if you're a shred guitar player, for instance, and you want to learn blues, then you've already learned most of the skills you need there. You've already got good left hand and right hand technique. You've already learned a lot of the theory that you'll need, the scales and chords and everything like that. You've already learned how to apply that stuff to music, and you've already got a good sense of timing and rhythm and so on. So you've already got most of the skills you need. It's just a case of applying them to a new genre. Okay, and that's a really easy thing to do because you can use the simple three-step process. So step one, get the right guitar tone. Now remember, you don't have to buy any new equipment or anything like that, just use the equipment you've already got, the guitar, the amplifier, pedals, whatever, and just see if you can get a tone close to what people use in that genre. So listen to some great blues players, try and copy their tone, and then have a look on the internet, see if anyone can give any advice. And then once you've done that, step number two is learn the typical cliched licks and solos and songs in that style to get a sense of why the style sounds like it does. So you learn the cliches, for instance, you learn a typical blues lick, you know. And then once you've done that, you ask yourself, well, why does it sound like that? So what scales are they using? What notes are they using? How are they using those? How fast is it played? Everything like that. And then you'll get a good sense of why that style sounds like it does. And then once you've got that information, you can move on to step three. And step three is to learn to think like somebody who plays that style. And this is a really easy thing to do. All you do is take the cliches that you've learned and then you improvise using them either over a backing track or just on your own without a backing track until they start to become embedded in your playing and they're some of your just go-to things that you automatically play anyway. And then you won't have to think about playing this new style. It will just be a really nice, easy thing to do. And this is the fastest way to learn any new guitar style. So I hope this video has been helpful for you. As always, if you've liked it, then don't forget to subscribe, comment, share, like, all the good stuff. You know the drill. And don't forget to check out tomguitar.co.uk for that free guide on how to massively boost your picking speed. I'm sure you'll really enjoy it and it will really help you.